My brother spent 7 years quietly ruining every relationship I ever had because he couldn't stand seeing me happy. I always suspected something was wrong, but I never had proof. Then about 6 months ago, I finally caught him. So when he eventually met a woman he genuinely cared about, I told her everything, and I had the receipts. She walked out on him before their appetizers even arrived. I'm Jake, 29, and my younger brother, Ethan, is 26. We grew up in a normal middle-class family with loving parents who treated us equally. There was no favoritism or golden child dynamic. As kids, we were close. I helped him with homework, taught him how to ride a bike, and tried to be the best big brother I could. Everything changed in our 20s, right after I started dating my first serious girlfriend, Jessica. We met at a friend's barbecue after college and hit it off immediately. She was funny, smart, and had an unforgettable laugh. After about 3 months, I introduced her to my family. Ethan was especially friendly, but I thought he was just welcoming her. Around the 5th month, Jessica suddenly became distant. She took longer to reply, canceled plans, and seemed uncomfortable around me. Then she ended the relationship, saying she didn't think we were compatible long-term. I was heartbroken, but respected her decision. About 6 months later, I met Amanda at a work conference. We bonded over our shared dislike of endless meetings and Excel spreadsheets. Once again, everything was great until I introduced her to my family. Ethan was charming, funny, and easy to get along with. Then, just like before, Amanda started pulling away after a few months. She became secretive, avoided spending time together, and eventually broke up with me, insisting there wasn't anyone else. She just didn't see a future with us. After 2 nearly identical breakups, I started wondering if I was the problem. I asked friends for honest feedback, but they all described me as caring, respectful, and supportive. I couldn't figure out why every relationship followed the exact same pattern. A year later, I met Rachel, a barista at a local coffee shop. She was outgoing, loved hiking, and encouraged me to spend more time outdoors. For the first few months, everything felt different. I honestly believed this relationship might last. Then I introduced her to my family. As always, Ethan turned on the charm. A couple months later, Rachel started growing distant too. This time, though, I noticed something strange. Ethan was constantly texting, keeping his phone face down during family dinners, and stepping away to take calls. I couldn't prove anything, and accusing my own brother of sabotaging my relationships sounded unbelievable. So I stayed quiet and watched history repeat itself. About 6 weeks later, Rachel ended things. 3 relationships. 3 nearly identical endings. If you'd like, I can also condense this into a 400-word, 250-word, or YouTube/Reddit storytelling version while keeping the emotional impact. After Rachel, I started paying close attention to the timing of everything. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Every relationship fell apart shortly after my girlfriends met Ethan. I still had no proof, just a growing suspicion and a series of coincidences that felt too consistent to be random. I decided to take a break from dating. For about 8 months, I focused on myself and my career. I earned a promotion to senior analyst, started playing basketball with coworkers, and tried to move on with my life. During that time, Ethan dated a few women, Brittany, then another, and another, but none of those relationships lasted. Part of me figured karma was finally catching up with him. Then, about 3 years ago, I met Kelly. She was a nurse with the kindest heart I'd ever known. And without question, she was the healthiest relationship I'd ever had. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely happy. After 8 months, we moved in together, and I was already thinking about proposing. This time, I made a different choice. I didn't introduce Kelly to my family. Whenever she asked, I came up with excuses. I said my parents were busy, schedules didn't line up, or we'd do another time. She thought it was a little strange, but didn't pressure me. Nearly a full year passed like that. And during that year, everything was perfect. There was no drama, no emotional distance, and no sudden change. We traveled together, planned our future, and even looked at houses we hoped to buy one day. I started believing I had been wrong about Ethan. Maybe the earlier relationships simply weren't meant to last. But eventually, Kelly told me she was hurt. She wanted to meet my family and couldn't understand why I kept avoiding it. She worried I was embarrassed by her or trying to hide her, which wasn't true at all. I just couldn't shake the feeling that something bad would happen. Eventually, I ran out of excuses and arranged a family dinner at my parents' house. The evening went well. My parents absolutely loved Kelly and kept telling me I'd found a keeper. Ethan was polite but surprisingly reserved. He wasn't overly friendly, and I actually took that as a good sign. Maybe he'd matured. Maybe he'd changed. Maybe I'd imagined everything. 2 weeks later, everything changed. Kelly became distant. She stopped talking about our future, kept things to herself, and seemed distracted all the time. That familiar sinking feeling came rushing back. When I asked what was wrong, she insisted everything was fine. But this time, I didn't let it go. I told her I could tell something had changed and needed her to be honest with me. Eventually, she admitted she'd been having doubts about our relationship. She said she wasn't sure we wanted the same things anymore and wondered if we'd moved too fast. I couldn't understand it. Just 2 weeks earlier, we'd been talking about buying a house together. I asked what had changed, but she couldn't give me a clear answer. She only said she needed space to think. 3 weeks later, we broke up. That breakup destroyed me. Unlike the others, Kelly and I had built a real life together. We shared a home, furniture, bills, and dreams for the future. Watching it all fall apart right after she met my family felt impossible to ignore. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment across town and spent the next few months in a really dark place. My friends kept trying to get me out of the house, but I wasn't interested. I buried myself in work, putting in 60-hour weeks and barely speaking to anyone. Then, one night, while working late, I received a text from an unknown number. It was Jessica, my first serious girlfriend from 7 years earlier. She said she needed to tell me something important and asked if we could meet for coffee. Confused but curious, I agreed. That Saturday afternoon, we met at a Starbucks near my office. Jessica looked nervous the entire time. She kept fidgeting with her coffee cup and avoided looking me in the eyes. Finally, she took a deep breath and told me the truth. Back when we were dating, Ethan had contacted her on social media. At first, the messages seemed harmless. He was friendly, asked how she was doing, and made casual conversation. But then he started telling her personal things about me. The first thing he claimed was that I had cheated on a girlfriend back in college. If you want, I can also make it feel even more like a best-selling Reddit revenge story with smoother pacing and stronger emotional impact while keeping every detail intact. None of it was true. Ethan told Jessica that I'd cheated on a girlfriend in college. I never had. He claimed I had serious anger issues and once punched a wall during an argument with a friend. That never happened either. He even told her I'd made disrespectful comments about women that made him uncomfortable. Every word was a lie. Jessica admitted that, at first, she didn't know what to think. She really cared about me, but Ethan was my own brother. In her mind, why would someone's brother make up stories like that? She assumed there had to be at least some truth behind what he was saying. She didn't want to build a future with someone who might have those kinds of problems, so she ended our relationship. She said she'd carried the guilt for years. As time passed, she realized the things Ethan had told her didn't match the man she'd actually dated. She'd thought about reaching out to apologize more than once, but never knew how. Then she saw on social media that Kelly and I had recently broken up, and that finally gave her the push to contact me. I sat there in Starbucks for what felt like a full minute, trying to process everything she'd just told me. Then I asked if she still had Ethan's messages. She pulled out her phone. There they were. Months of conversations where my own brother slowly destroyed my relationship by feeding Jessica one lie after another about who I was. I took screenshots of every single message. Before we left, I asked if she'd be willing to help me if I ever needed her later. She agreed without hesitation. She said she felt awful for believing him and wanted to do whatever she could to make things right. I thanked her for finally telling me the truth and walked out. I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes, staring at the screenshots on my phone. 7 years. 7 years of failed relationships. 7 years of wondering what was wrong with me. 7 years of believing I was somehow the problem. And all along, it had been Ethan. My first instinct was to confront him immediately, but I stopped myself. If he'd done this to Jessica, there was a good chance he'd done the same thing to every other woman I dated. I needed more proof. I reached out to Amanda through social media and kept the message simple. I told her I'd been thinking about our relationship and wanted to ask her something. She replied pretty quickly and agreed to meet for lunch later that week. I didn't tell her what Jessica had revealed. Instead, I asked one simple question. Why did you really break up with me? At first, she seemed uncomfortable talking about it, but eventually she opened up. Her story was almost identical. Ethan had contacted her, acted friendly, and slowly gained her trust before pretending he was concerned about me. Then he started planting doubts. He told her I'd been talking behind her back and saying I didn't think she was smart enough for me. I never said anything even close to that. He also claimed I was using dating apps while we were together. That was another complete lie. Little by little, he convinced her that I wasn't the person she believed I was until she couldn't trust me anymore and ended the relationship. Then I showed Amanda the screenshots Jessica had given me. The color drained from her face. She immediately started apologizing, saying she should have talked to me directly instead of believing Ethan. I told her I understood. Ethan was an expert at manipulating people. He knew exactly what to say and how to exploit their fears and insecurities. Amanda still had many of his messages too, so I added another set of screenshots to my growing collection of evidence. Next, I tried contacting Rachel. By then, she'd moved to another state and never responded. That was disappointing, but it didn't matter anymore. Between Jessica's messages and Amanda's, I already had enough proof. Still, I wanted to understand just how far Ethan had gone. I started digging through years of old social media posts, looking for anything I'd overlooked. That's when another pattern became obvious. Every time one of my relationships started falling apart, Ethan suddenly became much more active online. He'd comment on my posts, like photos of me and my girlfriend, tag me in random things, and interact just enough to make himself seem like the supportive younger brother. Now I realized what he was really doing. He was keeping himself connected to the women I dated and making sure he stayed part of their lives long enough to manipulate them. Out of curiosity, I checked his follower list. Jessica, Amanda, Rachel, Kelly. He was still following every single one of them. At some point, each of them had unfollowed him, but he had never unfollowed them. If you'd like, I can keep the same tone and continue rewriting the next section so the entire story reads consistently from start to finish. But Ethan never unfollowed them. It was almost as if he wanted to keep watching their lives after he'd destroyed their relationships with me. I spent hours documenting everything I could find, putting together a timeline of every interaction. Once I laid it all out, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Every relationship lasted almost the same amount of time. Everyone followed the exact same cycle. Things would start off great. Around the third month, I'd introduce my girlfriend to my family. Ethan would go out of his way to be friendly and charming. Then, sometime around months 4 or 5, everything would slowly begin falling apart until the relationship eventually ended. At that point, I did something I'm not exactly proud of. I created a fake social media account. I gave it a different name, used stock photos, built an entire fake backstory, and made the profile look as real as possible. According to the profile, this person worked in sales, lived a couple of towns away, and loved running. To make it believable, I spent weeks building the account. I added random friends, joined local community groups, commented on news articles, shared a few memes, liked other people's posts, and made casual updates about weekend plans and food. It took nearly 3 weeks before it looked like a real person instead of a fake profile. Once I was satisfied, I sent Ethan a friend request. He accepted it within a day. At first, our conversations were completely normal. I commented on one of his posts about a basketball game, then sent him a message about it. We chatted about sports for a while. A few days later, I messaged him again, asking for recommendations on local restaurants because I had supposedly just moved to the area. He happily gave me several suggestions. Over the next 2 weeks, I slowly built a friendly relationship with him. Nothing excessive, just short conversations every few days, so it felt natural. Then I casually mentioned that a friend of mine was dating someone and that the relationship seemed a little rocky. I asked if he'd ever dealt with relationship problems since he seemed like the kind of person who gave good advice. That was all it took. Ethan immediately started talking about relationships. He went on about how complicated people could be and how you never really knew someone's true character. He acted like some kind of relationship expert. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so disturbing. A few days later, I brought up my friend again. I casually mentioned that she was dating a guy named Jake and asked if he happened to know him because we'd noticed they had a mutual connection on social media. Ethan took the bait instantly. He asked which Jake I meant. I described myself, my job, where I lived, and what I looked like. He knew exactly who I was talking about. "Yeah," he replied. "That's my brother." Then he started talking, and he didn't hold back. He told this fake stranger that I was bad news. He claimed I had commitment issues, that I'd cheated on multiple girlfriends, and that I was emotionally manipulative and controlling. He even said he'd tried warning women about me before, but they never listened until they experienced it for themselves. He painted himself as the caring brother who was simply trying to protect innocent women from my supposedly toxic behavior. I took screenshots of every single message. That conversation was the final piece of evidence I needed. It proved this wasn't about one misunderstanding or one relationship. It was a pattern. It was deliberate. This was who Ethan really was. I sat on all that information for a few weeks, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to expose him immediately. I thought about sending every screenshot to our parents, posting everything online, and tearing his life apart the same way he destroyed mine. But that's not who I am. I don't make decisions in the heat of the moment. I wait until the timing is right. That moment finally came about 4 months ago. Ethan started dating a woman named Lauren. They'd been together for about 6 weeks when I first heard about her, and I could tell right away that this relationship was different. For the first time, Ethan actually seemed emotionally invested. He talked about Lauren during family dinners. He smiled whenever she texted him. He planned his schedule around hers. I'd never seen him care about anyone like that before. Out of curiosity, I looked Lauren up on social media. She was 25, worked as a graphic designer for a small agency, and from everything I could see, seemed like a genuinely kind person. She volunteered at an animal shelter, regularly posted about causes she cared about, and had a close group of friends who clearly adored her. The more I learned about her, the more convinced I became that she deserved far better than Ethan. So I waited. About 2 months into their relationship, Ethan finally brought Lauren to a family dinner. If you continue with the next section, I can keep rewriting the entire story in this same natural, engaging style, so it reads like a professionally written Reddit story. Lauren was kind, friendly, and easy to talk to. During dinner, she asked me about my job, my hobbies, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. I was polite, but I kept my distance. I wasn't about to become friends with someone who was dating the person who had spent 7 years destroying my life. What stood out most was how serious Ethan seemed about her. He held her hand throughout dinner, looked at her like she meant everything to him, and, for once, actually behaved like a decent person. My parents adored her. They kept joking that Ethan had better not mess this one up. About 3 months into their relationship, Ethan announced that he was going to ask Lauren to move in with him. My mom actually teared up at the dinner table. My dad gave Ethan a pat on the back and said it was about time he settled down. Everyone was genuinely happy for him. That's when I realized it was time to act. I reached out to Lauren through social media and sent her a message. I introduced myself as Ethan's brother and told her there was something important I needed to talk to her about. I explained that it wasn't an emergency, but it was something I believed she deserved to know before making any major decisions with him. Then I asked if she'd be willing to meet me for coffee. A few hours later, she replied. She was clearly confused, but she agreed. We met the following Tuesday afternoon at a coffee shop halfway between where we both lived. Lauren arrived right on time, although she looked nervous. I ordered coffee for both of us, and we sat down in a quiet corner. After a few minutes, she asked what this was all about. I told her I needed to show her something. I pulled out my laptop and opened a folder where I'd carefully organized every screenshot by date and by the person involved. Before I showed her anything, I told her I understood this would be overwhelming. I said she could stop at any time, take a break, or even walk away if she wanted. I wasn't trying to ambush her. I simply believed she deserved to know who she was planning to build a future with. She nodded and told me to continue. I started with Jessica. I showed Lauren the messages where Ethan had lied about me and deliberately destroyed my relationship by feeding Jessica one false story after another. I explained who Jessica was, how long we dated, and how I'd spent years wondering why she'd suddenly become distant before ending things. Lauren read every message carefully. As she kept scrolling, the confusion on her face slowly turned into concern. Then I told her about meeting Jessica years later and how guilty she felt for believing Ethan's lies. I showed Lauren the screenshots from our conversation, where Jessica apologized and explained everything she'd learned. Next, I opened Amanda's messages. The pattern was exactly the same. The only difference was that Ethan had tailored his lies specifically for Amanda. I explained how he'd told her I was secretly using dating apps while we were together. He'd also convinced her that I talked behind her back and thought she wasn't intelligent enough for me. None of it was true. By that point, Lauren had completely forgotten about her coffee. She simply sat there, reading every message in silence. After that, I told her about Rachel. I didn't have screenshots from Rachel because she never responded after moving away. But I explained how her relationship with me had followed the exact same pattern as the others. 3 different relationships, 3 identical endings. Each one started falling apart at almost the exact same point in the timeline. I admitted that, for years, I convinced myself I must have been the problem. I honestly believed I was somehow ruining my own relationships without realizing it. Finally, I showed her the conversation from the fake social media account I'd created. She read every message where Ethan spoke to a complete stranger and described me as a terrible person. He called me manipulative. He said I cheated on multiple girlfriends. He claimed I was controlling and emotionally abusive. Then he portrayed himself as the caring older brother who was only trying to protect innocent women from his toxic sibling. Lauren's hand was visibly shaking as she scrolled through those messages. Finally, I told her about Kelly. I explained how I'd tried to protect that relationship by delaying any introduction to my family for almost a year. During that entire year, everything between us had been perfect. We'd traveled together. We'd planned our future. We'd even started looking at houses because we want to buy a home together. Then, after Kelly finally met my family and Ethan, everything unraveled within a matter of weeks. I told Lauren how quickly our plans disappeared and how that relationship, just like all the others, ended shortly after Ethan entered the picture. When I finished, Lauren leaned back in her chair and stared silently at the laptop screen for nearly a full minute. I didn't say another word. I knew she needed time to process everything she'd just seen. After all, this wasn't just a few screenshots. It was the truth about the man she was planning to move in with. If you continue with the final part, I can keep the same style so the entire story reads smoothly and consistently from beginning to end. I told her everything, the timeline of my relationships, how each one fell apart the same way after Ethan got involved, and how I'd spent years believing I was the problem. I explained that I'd finally found proof of what he'd been doing and had been holding on to it, waiting for the right moment. Looking her in the eye, I said, I didn't know if Ethan had changed. Maybe he had. Maybe his relationship with you was real, and he'd become a better person. But before you move in with him, you deserve to know who he used to be and what he's capable of. Lauren stayed quiet for a long time, scrolling through the messages on my laptop. Finally, she asked if she could take pictures of the screenshots. I told her yes, and she carefully photographed every single one. Then she asked why I was telling her now. I was honest. I admitted that I'd been waiting for Ethan to truly care about someone the same way he'd stopped me from caring about anyone else. Part of me wanted him to experience the same pain I'd lived with. I wanted him to lose something that mattered to him. But it wasn't only about revenge. From everything I'd seen, Lauren seemed like a genuinely kind person. I didn't want her making such a huge decision based on a lie. Moving in with someone is a serious step, and she deserved to know the full truth. She asked if there was any chance I was making it all up or if I simply had a grudge against Ethan. I told her she didn't have to take my word for it. She could contact Jessica and Amanda herself. Their contact information was in the screenshots, and I encouraged her to verify everything independently. I understood that she had no reason to believe me over her boyfriend, but the evidence was there if she wanted to see it for herself. She nodded, said she understood, and asked for some time to think about everything. I gave her my phone number in case she had any questions, and we went our separate ways. For the next 3 days, I heard nothing from her or from Ethan. I assumed she hadn't told him about our meeting. I started wondering if she decided to stay with him or if she dismissed my story as a lie. Those 3 days were miserable. I barely slept and kept checking my phone, wondering if I'd made a mistake. Maybe I should have left it alone. Maybe revenge wasn't worth the risk of looking like the jealous, bitter brother if Lauren told Ethan and he twisted the story against me. But every time I doubted myself, I remembered those 7 years. I remembered sitting alone in my apartment after Kelly left, convinced there was something fundamentally wrong with me. I remembered all the self-help books I'd read, desperately trying to figure out why every relationship ended the same way. I remembered questioning my own worth because I couldn't understand why love never seemed to last. That's when I knew I'd made the right decision. Lauren deserved the truth, and Ethan deserved to face the consequences of what he'd done. Then, on Friday evening, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Ethan. Asterisk, we need to talk now. Asterisk, I called him immediately. He answered on the first ring and started yelling before I could say a word. He called me every name imaginable, accused me of ruining his life, and demanded to know how I could do this to him. I stayed calm and simply asked what he was talking about. He told me Lauren had broken up with him. They'd gone out for dinner at a nice Italian restaurant where he'd made reservations weeks in advance. His plan was to give her a key to his apartment over dessert and officially ask her to move in with him. But before their appetizers even arrived, Lauren started asking questions. She asked about Jessica, then Amanda, then the fake social media account. She pulled out her phone and showed him every screenshot I'd shared. Right there in the middle of the restaurant, she confronted him with every lie he'd told, every relationship he'd sabotaged, and every manipulation he'd carried out. At first, Ethan denied everything. He claimed I'd fabricated the evidence because I was jealous of his happiness and insisted he'd never do anything like that. But Lauren had already done her own investigation. After meeting me, she'd contacted Jessica and Amanda herself and confirmed their stories. She had even managed to track down Rachel and got confirmation from her as well. Lauren told Ethan she couldn't be with someone who was capable of treating his own brother with that level of cruelty. She said it didn't matter whether he'd changed or become a different person. The fact that he'd done those things in the first place was enough for her. She placed $60 on the table to cover her half of the dinner they never got to eat, told him to lose her number, and walked out. Ethan sat alone in the restaurant for nearly 20 minutes before leaving. Then he called me. I let him yell for a while. He called me every name he could think of, blaming me for ruining his life. When he finally ran out of things to say, I asked him if he was finished. He went quiet. Then I started asking him questions. I asked if he remembered Jessica, Amanda, Rachel, Kelly. I asked if he remembered everything he'd done to each of them and whether he'd ever stopped to think about what all of it had done to me. He didn't answer. I told him I'd spent 7 years believing there was something wrong with me. 7 years of failed relationships, constant self-doubt, and wondering why I couldn't build a future with good women. All that time, he'd been secretly pulling the strings while pretending to be my supportive brother. I reminded him that I'd given him countless chances to come clean, apologize, or show even the smallest amount of remorse. Instead, he kept doing it. Even after Kelly, the one relationship I'd tried hardest to protect from him, he still found a way to destroy it. Finally, Ethan tried to explain himself. He admitted he didn't really know why he'd done it. He said he'd always been jealous of how easily relationships seemed to come to me while he struggled. From his perspective, it looked like I had everything figured out. He insisted he never intended things to go this far. According to him, it had started as a stupid joke before spiraling completely out of control. I cut him off. I told him I didn't care about his reasons. I didn't care whether he was sorry or whether he'd changed. The only thing that mattered to me was making sure he experienced even a small part of the pain I'd lived through every time another relationship collapsed for reasons I couldn't understand. I also told him Lauren deserved far better than someone like him, and I was glad I'd been able to stop her from making the mistake of moving in with him. Then I hung up. The next day, my parents called. Ethan had already told them his version of the story, one that made me look like the villain. They wanted to hear my side, so I sent them everything, the screenshots, the messages from Jessica and Amanda, and the complete timeline of what had happened over the years. I laid out every piece of evidence. My mom cried. My dad went quiet in the way he always does when he's deeply disappointed. They said they needed time to process everything, but they believed me. The evidence was simply too overwhelming to ignore. That was 2 months ago. Since that phone call, Ethan and I haven't spoken. My parents have tried to encourage some kind of reconciliation, but I've made it clear that I have no interest in rebuilding a relationship with him. Some betrayals are too deep to come back from, and 7 years of deliberately sabotaging my life is one of them. Last week, my mom told me Ethan has been struggling. Apparently, he tried reaching out to Lauren several times, but she blocked him everywhere. He's miserable at family dinners now and barely speaks to anyone. My mom believes he's genuinely remorseful and wants to make things right. I don't. He had years to feel remorse, years to stop, years to tell the truth, and be the brother he should have been instead of manipulating my life behind my back. The only reason he feels sorry now is because, for the first time, he had to face the consequences of his actions. As for me, I'm doing okay. About a month ago, I started seeing someone new. Her name is Nicole, and she's a veterinarian who specializes in exotic animals. We met at a friend's birthday party, and we've been taking things slowly. On our third date, I told her everything about Ethan. I figured she deserved to know what kind of family situation she might be walking into. Her response couldn't have been better. She told me that anyone who could go through what I had and still be willing to trust someone new must be a pretty strong person. She also said she'd love to meet my parents someday, but she completely understood if I wanted to keep her away from the family drama for a while. I'm planning to introduce her to my parents next month. Just my parents. Ethan won't be there. I've already made it clear to my mom that if I'm attending a family gathering, Ethan can't be there. She doesn't like the arrangement, but she respects my decision. A few weeks later, Jessica reached out again. She'd heard through mutual friends about what had happened with Lauren and wanted to see how I was doing. We met for coffee, and she apologized once more for believing Ethan all those years ago. I told her it wasn't her fault. Ethan was a convincing liar, and at the time, she had no reason to question him. She also told me she was engaged and getting married next spring. She said her fiancé is a genuinely good man who treats her well, and that she's learned to trust her own instincts instead of letting outside voices influence her decisions. I was genuinely happy for her. She deserved that kind of happiness. Amanda reached out last month as well. She'd been hearing bits and pieces of everything through Jessica and wanted to check in. I told her I was doing better than I had in years. She said she was glad to hear it and hoped I'd eventually find someone who truly appreciated me. I smiled and told her I thought I already had. Rachel never replied to the messages I'd originally sent her, but I've made peace with that. She's living her life somewhere else, and I'm living mine here. That's okay. Looking back, I don't regret telling Lauren the truth. Some people might say it was petty or vindictive, but I honestly believe she deserved to know exactly who she was planning to build a future with. If Ethan had truly changed and become a better person, then maybe their relationship could have survived the truth. The fact that it didn't says far more about him than it does about me. If I could go back, would I do anything differently? Maybe. Maybe I would have confronted Ethan years earlier. Maybe I would have started looking for proof instead of spending so much time blaming myself. But I can't change the past. And honestly, I think everything unfolded the way it needed to. Ethan finally learned that actions have consequences. Lauren avoided what probably would have become a terrible living situation. And I finally found closure after 7 years of confusion, self-doubt, and wondering what was wrong with me. My friends have been incredibly supportive through all of this. For years they'd sensed something wasn't right, but none of us had any proof. When I finally showed them the screenshots and explained everything, they were shocked, but at the same time, not entirely surprised. One of my closest friends admitted he'd always thought Ethan seemed fake. He was almost too friendly, in a way that felt rehearsed and calculated. Turns out his instincts were right. I thought about reaching out to Kelly more than once. Losing her hurt more than any of the others, and sometimes I wonder if she deserves to know the real reason our relationship fell apart. But I don't know whether telling her now would bring closure or simply reopen old wounds for both of us. She's moved on with her life. Maybe it's better to leave the past where it belongs. The hardest part of everything hasn't been dealing with Ethan or even what happened with Lauren. It's accepting that my own brother, the person I grew up with, trusted, and believed would always have my back, was capable of that level of calculated cruelty. That's still the part I'm trying to come to terms with. People sometimes ask if I hate him. The truth is, I don't. Hate takes energy, and I'm done wasting any more of mine on him. I'm simply finished. He's not my brother in any meaningful way anymore. He's just someone I happen to share DNA with, someone who stole a huge part of my 20s because of his own insecurities. To cope with everything, I threw myself into work and hobbies. I picked up my guitar again for the first time since college. I joined a recreational basketball league with a few guys from work. Most importantly, I stayed busy enough that I didn't have time to sit around and spiral. Playing guitar has probably helped the most. I've forgotten how much I loved it, and it's become the perfect outlet for everything I've been carrying. Last week, Nicole came over while I was practicing. She listened for a while, smiled, and told me I was actually pretty good. Then she asked if I'd ever considered joining a band. I laughed and told her no. It was just something I did for myself. Still, it felt good to have someone genuinely interested in something that mattered to me. Work has been going well, too. About a month ago, I was promoted again. I'm a director now, leading a team of 8 analysts. The added responsibility keeps me focused during the day, and the raise certainly doesn't hurt either. For the first time, I'm in a position where buying a house feels realistic instead of continuing to rent. That feels like a real milestone. Last week, my parents invited me over for dinner. It was just the 3 of us, no Ethan. We spent the evening talking about ordinary things, my dad's golf game, my mom's book club, and my new role at work. For the first time in a long while, it felt almost normal. Of course, there was still an Ethan-shaped elephant in the room that none of us wanted to acknowledge. Toward the end of dinner, my dad asked what I wanted them to do about the upcoming family holidays. I answered honestly, I'm not ready to be in the same room as Ethan. Maybe I never will be. I told my parents that if they wanted to split the holidays so each of us could spend time with them separately, I was completely fine with that. They both looked heartbroken, but they understood. My mom asked if I could ever see myself forgiving Ethan. I took a moment to think before answering. I told her that maybe things could have been different if Ethan had come clean on his own, if he'd admitted everything without being exposed, shown genuine remorse, and apologized before facing any consequences. Maybe then there could have been a path toward forgiveness. But that's not what happened. The only reason he felt sorry was because his actions finally caught up with him. To me, that's not true remorse. That's just regret over getting caught. After that, my mom didn't bring it up again. Thanksgiving is next week. I'll be having dinner with my parents on Thursday, and Ethan will come the following day on Friday. My mom is actually cooking 2 separate Thanksgiving dinners. It seems like a lot, but she insisted. She said she wants both of her sons to have a proper Thanksgiving, even if we can't be in the same room. Nicole will be spending Thanksgiving with her own family, but we're planning to meet up later that evening to watch a movie or to spend some quiet time together. She knows family has been complicated for me lately, and she's never pressured me to include her in any of it. I really appreciate that. There's no rush. We're taking our relationship one step at a time. The other day, I told Nicole about this whole Reddit post. She laughed and said it sounded like the plot of the movie. I laughed too and replied, yeah. Except in movies, the brothers usually make up at the end. She asked if I thought that would ever happen with Ethan. I told her no, and honestly, I was okay with that. She kissed me and said she thought I'd handled everything remarkably well. So that's where things stand. Ethan is somewhere dealing with the consequences of his choices and the loss of Lauren. Lauren is hopefully living a happier life, free from my brother's manipulation. My ex-girlfriends have all moved on with their lives. And as for me, I'm here with Nicole, happier than I've been in years. For the first time in a long time, I finally feel free from the sabotage that overshadowed so much of my 20s.